It's like day 27 quarantine. Can't even go out to get something to eat. Thinking about eating my own arm.
Mr. Phelps's class. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. Hopefully, it doesn't feel like it's day 27, but I know this is kind of an odd time. So keep on trucking, doing what you can. If you need to send me an email, let me know how you're doing, or if you got any major concerns, and we'll try to work through them. Today we're going to work on NoRedInk like we normally do on Fridays. I've given you one review and two that are new. The one of them that is new is not too terrible. I think it's pretty easy. The other one can be a little challenging, so I'll try to walk you through it kind of slowly to make sure that you get it understood. Okay, so let's get into that. Let me move my screen down here. Okay, so the three sections you have today in NoRedInk, they're all still dealing with commas. We'll be dealing with those for a couple more weeks at least because there's a lot of different rules with those. And so the introductory phrases I felt was still valid and something that people, a handful of people are still struggling with a little bit. So we're going to review that. Again, if you're doing okay with that stuff and you've already shown mastery in it, then that section will be very quick for you. Maybe just a few questions and then it'll let you move on. The second one is separating adjectives. And that is new, but also pretty easy. So, thinking about like the big green tree or something like that, that would be what I mean by big and green, knowing if you need to have a comma in between those. And then finally, the restrictive versus non-restricted clauses. That's a little more challenging, but it's not terribly difficult either. So, yeah, let's go through these one at a time. I'm not going to go through the introductory phrases and clauses. Definitely, if you need help with that, then look at the NoRedInk lessons. And I would say for all of these, and this is something that I've noticed, excuse me, this is something that I've noticed is that when students are getting some answers wrong, you skim past past the lesson where it tells you what you did wrong and how you can fix it. So if you are struggling with one, or if you're just getting one wrong and you don't know why, then use that after it tells you, not quite, and then sends you to the place where it says try a similar problem. That whole page is a lesson telling you what you've done wrong. And so if the quicker you can understand that and understand what the actual rule is, the less it feels frustrating for you. Okay, so especially while I'm not there to help you immediately, use those resources. That's what those are there for. Okay, so let's get into separating adjectives. All right, so we have two different sentences here. These are both, both of these have two adjectives. So Lou picked a juicy, sweet apple from the tree. You can see juicy is describing the apple, sweet is describing the apple, and we need to decide if we need to use this comma or not. All right, the other one is Lou picked 3 sweet apples from the tree. These are both kind of doing the same thing. 3 is describing how many apples, and sweet is describing apples, so they're both adjectives as well. But just as a hint, we know, or I know, that we need one with a comma and one that doesn't have a comma. Excuse me. So the way to tell that is if I can use the word and in place of this comma, if I can use and to replace that comma, then I end up being able, I'll show you an example, being able to know that that deserves a comma. So if I can say that Lou picked a juicy and sweet apple from the tree, then yeah, I need a comma there. All right, the other test is if I can swap those two adjectives and it still makes sense. Lou picked a sweet and juicy apple from the tree. Okay, so since both of those things are correct, I can replace it with and I can swap those, then I know that I need a comma here. So this is correct as it is. I want to have a comma in between those. And that would apply if I had multiple, more than 2 adjectives in the same sentence. So if I had 3 or 4, then I still use that same test to figure out if I need a comma there at all. All right, you can tell that there's a difference here when it says Lou picked 3 sweet apples from the tree. Well, scrolling down a little bit, I can't add an and there. Whoops. Lou picked 3 and sweet apples from the tree. Obviously, that doesn't sound right. Um, we can do the other test, but since we already know it, then we just wouldn't add that. Sweet 3 apples, and even that sounds funky, right? Sweet, and it's even telling me that it's funky. We can add an and there, and it still won't make any sense. So that's the test. If I can add an and in between my adjectives, and it still works, then I need a comma. If I can't add the and, then I don't need a comma, just like this. So this sentence is correct as it stands. All right. So that's that one. I feel like that one's pretty straightforward. If you remember the test, about using and, then you should pick that up pretty quickly. Okay, let me scroll down here. This is restrictive versus non-restrictive clauses. So that's kind of complicated. It's kind of complicated. I'm going to move my image out of the way a little bit so we can see that a little better. Kind of complicated names, but it's still not that complicated of concept. We also just have some things like some grammar rules are, we just have to memorize them, and there's really no better way of explaining it. That being said, I'll try to explain it the best I can. All right. So a restrictive clause, and a restrictive clause always begins with that. All right. So here's an example. The jewels that cost a lot of money were stolen. All right. So that cost a lot of money, in this case, doesn't need commas because it's not extra to the sentence. I can't take that part out. Not the way that I've got it written right now. And so also because I know that it starts with that, then I don't need any commas. It's called restrictive because I can't take it out, because it's important to the sentence. And that means that there are other jewels that don't cost a lot of money that were also stolen. Or there are other jewels that don't cost a lot of money that were left behind and not stolen. The commas are telling me, in the way that the sentence is constructed with that, is telling me some extra information about these jewels. Okay, so the easy way to remember this is that if you see it start with that, then it's a restrictive clause and it doesn't need any commas. All right. The same thing happens here, so it doesn't have to happen in the middle of the sentence. It can happen, pretty much anywhere else. So I packed a sandwich that was packed with pickles. So here I don't need a comma after sandwich. That would be wrong. Because number one, it starts with the word that, and secondly, it's telling me that it's just talking about a specific sandwich that was packed with pickles, but there may be other sandwiches. All right, but in this case, I'm restricting it just to this one that was packed with pickles, and not to assume that that's the only sandwich out there. Okay, but again, the quick and easy way to remember this is if it says that, you don't need a comma. That makes it a restrictive clause. All right, a non-restrictive clause, as you can imagine, begins with different words, and it does need commas. So these are very similar to the appositives, and actually these are appositives, the ways that these are structured, meaning that when you're dealing with appositives, you generally have a comma on both sides. All right, so non-restrictive clauses begin with which or who, and here's some examples. The jewels, which cost a lot of money, were stolen. All right, now the way that I've got this constructed with the two commas and with the word which, this tells me, or tells the reader, that I can remove this section, which cost a lot of money. I can remove that section from the sentence entirely, and the meaning of the sentence does not change. So if it just said the jewels were stolen, then I can assume that all the jewels were stolen. And that tells me that I'm not trying to restrict it between jewels that were expensive or jewels that were cheap. I'm talking about all the jewels. All right. So in this case, because it starts with which, and because I don't want to limit it to specific jewels, I want to talk about all of them. Then I use a non-restrictive clause and I put commas on each side of that. Okay. The same thing happens. Here's a really simple example based on the appositive work that we've been doing. My English teacher who has a beard teaches online. Okay, same rules apply, except it's which versus who. But still, I can remove this entirely, and that doesn't matter at all to the sentence. It's just extra information about my English teacher in the same way that this is just extra information about these jewels. But you only have one English teacher. And that English teacher does indeed have a beard, and so the idea is that we don't need to restrict this clause to identify this English teacher versus another English teacher. This is the only English teacher you have. And so we're setting this out with commas. We're putting one on each side, and that would be called a non-restrictive clause. Okay, so that's how you know when to use commas in those situations. So again, the quick and dirty rule is if you have that, that means no clause or no comma, and if you have that, no comma, versus if you have which or who, you get a comma, and you can double check it by removing that portion from the sentence and seeing if it still works. Okay? All right, so again, like as you struggle with these, if you struggle with these, then please look at those lessons. Let the example show you what you're struggling with and try to teach you that. That being said, if you need to get a hold of me, email is always best, and we'll try to work through it online. I know this is a little tough to do, again, like I said at the beginning. So, but everybody just have patience as much as you can, and try to communicate as often as possible, and we'll get through it together. So, take care, everybody. Hope you have a good weekend, and again, let me know if you need any help. Bye bye.
Mr. Phelps's class. Yeah.